Hi there, I'm Danny Flexen. Welcome to the latest edition of SecondsOut ReFLEXions. This is our weekly show here on Mondays at 4:30 p.m. where we talk about the boxing action of the weekend just gone. And I didn't watch the Triller show live, which a lot of people are talking about, and we'll come to that. But I did watch the Zone show, topped by Demetrius Andrade's defense of his WBO middleweight title against Liam Williams. And it's interesting because Andrade's been much criticised leading into the fight, not just by people who felt Williams would run over him, basically, in some quarters, but also just generally about the fact that he hasn't really fought anyone worthy of some of the plaudits his fans give him. He may be one of the most technically gifted fighters, particularly defensively, in the world today, but we certainly haven't seen the quality of opposition to match the perceived ability that he has. Liam Williams, mandatory contender, earned his right, was on a really hot run of form going into the fight, but it's fair to say Andrade stamped his authority on the bout from early on, got the jab working, his lateral movement was excellent, his timing was really good as well, and he was able to outmaneuver Williams. Williams isn't slow by any means, he's quite quick on his feet, but he was made to look pedestrian at times by Andrade, so deft was his own footwork. Very impressive in the early going, but then when Williams got up from an early knockdown to kind of continue pouring forward and bringing the fight to Andrade, the champion did start to fade. I felt he made sure of the victory, even though he didn't really need to. He was far enough ahead, but he made sure in the last couple of rounds. But in those middle rounds, he did kind of fade. He took a couple of rounds off. He held far too much, and I felt he should have been warned more severely for that early, and if he then carried on, maybe been docked a point, which he never really was. The referee was very lenient when it came to that approach, and he probably didn't need to hold as much as he did. I mean, if you can get away with it, why wouldn't you? But he probably didn't need to do that. He was good enough not to. But Williams had his moments, landed some clean shots, particularly a right hand at some point in the middle rounds. Can't remember exactly which session it was, to hurt Andrade briefly. But quickly, the champion wrested back control. It's whether that performance was enough, and it very much was a kind of performance of two halves, whether that was enough, A, to prove, to make people believe he's worthy of sharing a ring with the likes of Triple G and Canelo Alvarez, two of his long-time targets. Not easy to say that. And also whether there were enough flaws in his performance to entice the likes of Triple G and Canelo into sharing a ring with him, because obviously he could still be seen as high risk, low reward. Now, I'd say the performance against Williams illustrated a bit more on the risk side, in that he does have limitations. There are inroads to beating him. I don't think Canelo or Triple G would watch that performance and feel like they have too much to worry about, so that makes it more likely they'd accept the fight. But in terms of reward, I'm not sure. He's still not fought any marquee names. He's not a massive crossover star name either. So it's hard to say just how much good he's done himself. If he would have jumped on Williams after that early knockdown and managed to get him out of there, I think that might have gone some way to building his star power and getting, the public clamouring for him to go against the others, not just because it's an explosive finish, but also because the public who were watching would have been spared the second half of the fight where he faded. If he would have just stopped Williams in the third or fourth round, for example, and Williams was very brave, very durable, so no knock on him, but if he had done that, then people might be saying, wow, no one's done that to Liam Williams before. He's lost, but no one's mauled him like that so early on. Incredible, accurate punch, pot shot in display. Get him in with Triple G. Get him in with Canelo. He didn't really do that. He didn't put the exclamation point that he needed on his performance. And not many people seem to be talking about the fight either during or after, which is kind of important. The same cannot be said in the build-up, during, having looked back at social media feeds the next morning, and after Jake Paul's first round KO of Ben Askren. Now, in terms of boxing technique and expertise, it was night and day. Demetrius Andrade put on a superb performance. Liam Williams was technically very good in patches as well. Jake Paul didn't really get much time to show any technical improvements he's made since his last fight, and I say fight in inverted commas. And Ben Askren didn't seem to have any from a striking standpoint to offer. But nonetheless, people didn't seem to mind. I think most people expected it to be over quickly. I don't think anyone tuned in expecting, Sugar Ray Leonard against Thomas Hearns, or, more recently Oscar De La Hoya against Shane Mosley. I think people knew that it was going to be raw and wild and probably quite short, and that's exactly how it turned out. Jake Paul looks a half-decent fighter. It's very hard to tell until he goes up against an actual boxer just how good he is and what stage of his career, if it's going to become a career that he's at. But he looks half-decent, and Ben Askren looks like what he is, a world-class wrestler who's got very little, if any, striking ability. And despite Freddie Roach, who'd worked with Askren for a week leading up to the fight, talking about how Askren was going to win and his striking's underrated, you knew that Freddie was just saying that to build up the fight and doing his bit, and fair play to him for doing so. But any real boxing fans had seen video of Askren. They'd also seen his striking, attempts in UFC and MMA, like other organisations. And they knew he wasn't much cop from that standpoint. Now, obviously, get him in a cage, and I think Jake Paul would get taken down and brutalised pretty quickly. But, Paul knows his limits, certainly at the moment, and in picking a big name, relatively, from the UFC world, who's someone who's got very limited striking abilities, but certainly Askren did more than his part in selling the fight. Paul and Triller picked incredibly well. You can talk about the other fights on the show. I know there was a contentious ending to Regis Prograis and Ivan Redkach, and also Frank Mir and Steve Cunningham had their fight. I mean, Frank Mir is still a pretty big name, albeit, getting into the veteran stage, or long into the veteran stage, you might say. But it was all about the main event, and really mostly about Jake Paul, although, as I said, Askren more than played his role. And now we all wait to see what happens next. But I think the main message I took from the weekend, and you could say, well, obviously, have you only just kind of caught up to things? But so many more people seem to be interested in Paul Askren, in watching it, in discussing it, in talking about it afterwards, than they were in Andrade Williams. And that's not to say, Triller boxing trumps traditional boxing, game over, because Andrade isn't the biggest star, or even close to, in world boxing. It wasn't a hugely anticipated fight, even by boxing standards. It's not, Canelo, Billy Joe Saunders on May the 8th. Let's see the reception to that, because that will hopefully have a massive crowd. It's the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the sport against an unbeaten two-weight world champion, someone who, a section of fans believe has got the style to really trouble Canelo. So let's see how that does. But at the moment, the Triller events, and we haven't got the numbers, obviously, on pay-per-view for the Jake Paul Ben Askren event yet, but we know Mike Tyson, Roy Jones Jr., which is kind of big names, but retired and coming back for an exhibition. We know that did really well on pay-per-view. Judging by the reaction and the people talking and everyone who seemed to watch it, whether by legal or illegal means, we would expect that to do good numbers as well. Jake Paul's star continues to rise, but more importantly, the kind of Triller package seems to be doing really well. And it'll be interesting to see how they do with a traditional boxing main event, or semi-main event, depending on what else they put on the card, between George Kambosos Jr. challenging Teofimo Lopez, because they're great talkers. We saw their press conference with Triller over the weekend. They'll be going in to really put on a show. And that, combined with the other things Triller offers, the musical performances, the offbeat commentary, Snoop Dogg, I won't say an unsung hero because everyone's praising him, but his commentary, the musical performances, the fights themselves, the crossover nature of the fights as well, boxers versus MMA fighters, and stuff like that, veterans, people who've retired coming back, all that sort of thing. There seems to be a real appetite for it at the moment, and I'm guessing A, it's because there's so many well-known names involved, which helps. B, because it's something different and it's refreshing. Boxing takes itself incredibly seriously at times, and then undermines that serious nature and that credibility with the multitude of world titles, the issues with fighters missing weight, catch weight contests. I could go on and on. WBA ranking Daniel Dubois' next opponent at number 2, it comes to mind, and various others as well. A lot of them involving the WBA, but the other sanctioning bodies are by no means blameless. Whereas Triller doesn't take itself too seriously. It's supposed to be fun. and it relentlessly lives up to that. It has something for everyone. You know, if you don't like a traditional boxing fight, which they had on this show with Pro Grey Red Catch, which they'll have with Lopez Cambosos, you might like veterans who you remember from your youth fighting if you're an older fan. You might like the crossover elements if you're an MMA fan. You might like the musical performances and the commentary if you're a hip hop fan. You know, there is something for everyone. It's kind of a variety show, but within combat. And it's good fun, and it kind of takes advantage of this reality TV era that we're living in, where everything's pushed on social media. And I think Triller's done really well to spot that gap in the market. I guess the main question is, you know, while its star is still rising at the moment, when will it plateau, and how long will the wave last? Because it is a novelty at the moment, and once it's not a novelty anymore, once we see Triller events every month or every 2 months, will people get bored of it? Will it just become a bit of a sideshow? Will the numbers start to drop? Will some of the bigger boxing fights, instead of taking place on Triller shows, come back towards the normal cards where the boxing fans are used to tuning in with, you know, PBC or ESPN in the States and Sky Sports, BT Sport here? How long will this last? I mean, I think it's still got a good, you know, a lot of gas left in the tank as it stands, but I guess it's going to come down to which names they can attract, how different they can make it, and will the Triller product evolve? We don't really want it, I don't think, to evolve into a traditional boxing promotion, because the whole reason why it's doing well is because it's different, it's diverse. But it still needs to evolve as it goes. It can't just stay the same all the time, because if it's very, you know, exoticness, it's differentness, if you like. I know they're not words. But if that's what's attracting people, then it needs to keep changing, at least in nuances, you know, in small ways. So we shall see. But at the moment, you know, certainly if this weekend's a kind of like a summary of the battle between the two sides in microcosm, and again, we will wait to see what happens with Canelo Saunders, and hopefully this year AJ against Tyson Fury, which is the biggest fight that can be made logically this year. We'll see how they do. But at the moment, Triller seems to be the word on everyone's lips. And that's a shame for Demetrius Andrade, who's already struggling to become more well-known in the combat sports community. But also perhaps a shame for traditional boxing as a whole. And I guess we hope that the traditional boxing promoters try and respond to what Triller is doing. Not necessarily by making themselves more like Triller, but by making some of the best fights happen more regularly, which we certainly want to see, and Showtime announcing their schedule as a whole and having fixed dates and people knowing what's coming. I think that's a big help. But also just making new changes, trying different things. You remember when Prize Fighter started? It's not even that much different. It's still traditional boxing, but in a tournament format. And that was a big kind of hit early on, and then when it got stale, they got rid of it, which is fine. But trying these new things every few years, just little tweaks, can make a big difference and can attract some more crossover fans to add to the hardcore that we'll always watch no matter what. And I think it's now time for boxing to have a look at what Triller are doing, mould it in their own way. We're not saying they should have a, you know, in UK, a grime star on commentary or anything like that. Sorry, Skepta, you know, if you're a boxing fan. But I think, you know, don't outright copy them, but find new ways of attracting a casual audience yourselves. Because we don't want to lose more big fights like Lopez Cambosos to Triller cars necessarily, because for hardcore boxing fans like me, I don't necessarily want to tune into a whole Triller event. And if I have to pay to watch Lopez Cambosos, I'll probably pay for it and then only watch the main event, which I've done before with several pay-per-views, but that's not the point. You know, we want to see big boxing fights backed up by a traditional, really good boxing undercard in an ideal world. Well, that's what I think anyway. What do you guys think? Let me know what you thought of Andrade Williams, and also if you watched it of Jake Paul and Ben Askren. What did you make of the whole production? What do you think boxing can learn, if anything, from the Triller production and event? What can they take and then mould into their own way? What do you like about the Triller events that you haven't seen in a normal boxing card? If you're a traditional boxing fan who's only just started watching these type of events, what attracted you in the first place, and what's going to keep you watching them? I'm actually really interested to know, because I haven't watched a Triller event yet. So it'd be good to know what you guys think, and then maybe I'll pop my Triller cherry and even that's not easy to say or particularly palatable, for their next event, which will probably be, Lopez Cambosos, which I want to see anyway. Let me know what you think. I'll respond to some of the comments. I will see you all on Thursday, hopefully, for FLEXpectations. Not hopefully from my point of view. I mean, hopefully you will all tune in. 4:30 p.m. And then I'll be back for the next ReFLEXions next Monday, again at 4:30. Really appreciate your time, and I'll see you all soon.